Greetings. Now, those who have viewed this channel and or read my Atom publication are aware that I contend that all technological disruptions are interconnected and mutually reinforcing because all are subsets of the accelerating tectonic medium of the world, which is always growing as a percentage of the total economy and accelerating as well. Therefore, two seemingly unrelated events are actually very well connected, and most people would not think there's any connection between these two things, but they are very connected. We will look at two very recent technological disruptions, one of which is complete and one of which is about to begin in earnest. The one that was recently completed was the displacement of the taxi medallion concept with ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. And the one that is about to happen and is in some ways already in its early stages is the disruption of commercial real estate and residential real estate in expensive cities due to the telework revolution, and how the zoning tax, which is the chart that you see here that I'll describe later in this video, how the zoning tax created the crucible in which this second disruption could occur, because it occurred for the same reasons that the disruption of taxis via Uber and Lyft also occurred. The comparison of these two disruptions will also reveal how much the entire world is under the influence of events that occur in economic epicenters like New York City and the San Francisco Bay Area. The whole world can be affected by a disruption that originates from the scarcity model of a certain commodity in these very expensive cities where a lot of wealthy people are concentrated. So for the first part of this video, we will go to a clip from an earlier video that I created. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about greed, short-sightedness, self-importance, and technological disruption. And for that, we go to one of my older articles on the futurist, the Atom Award of the month of July 2017. And we click on this chart over here. This was the price of a New York City taxi medallion by year. Even in 2004, it was $200,000 to get a New York City taxi medallion. That is pretty expensive. But New York City's taxi medallion authorities started to get greedy. They said, hey, we're New York City. No one can compete with us. People have to come here and people have to use taxis. So let's start charging more and more and more. They went from 200,000 to 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000, even up to 700,000 by 2012. Had they stopped over here, people might have complained, but still would have paid the cost. But the New York City Taxi Medallion Authority had to get greedy because they had not faced any consequences yet. They had to get attracted to a round number, even though $1 million is a 42% increase from 700,000. And they decided that we're New York City and we just cannot be replaced and we can pretty much charge anything all the way up to infinity. So they shot it up to $1 million, 700,000 to $1 million. And therefore from 2004 to 2013, they went from 200,000 to $1 million. Now, this is what happened. This became a gigantic delta between what is technologically possible and what a monopolistic incumbent vendor was able to charge. When taxis are this expensive in New York City, there was an opportunity for a startup by the name of Uber to provide a much more high-tech service and to do so at low cost, given that all these non-taxi drivers also have cars and open capacity that they could potentially take passengers along in. And being more high-tech, it had a lot of other advantages, such as the identity of both the driver and passenger are known. There's a record of rides. The driver and passenger can actually give ratings for each other. And if you leave something in an Uber car, you can actually contact your previous driver and there's some chance you might get it back. Whereas with a taxi, there's no chance that you'll get your bag or purse or whatever back. And an Uber car is usually a lot cleaner than a taxi, certainly in terms of cigarette smoke in the upholstery and things like that. So Uber was just better in every possible way, but it was not artificially overpriced because of the Taxi Medallion Authority exploiting the taxi drivers. That's what is going on. The taxi drivers were angry at Uber, but when in fact they should have been angry at the Taxi Medallion Authority that is just charging more and more for an inert right, the privilege to be a taxi driver in New York City. So then what happened is that taxis started to lose demand And the price fell so quickly back down to $200,000, even now 13 years later in 2017. And now they cannot even sustain a price that they had in 2004. Had they not gotten so greedy, they would not have created such a large delta of cost advantage that a startup like Uber could exploit. And this affected cities that even did not get greedy over the world. New York City is big enough that once Uber generated enough momentum within New York City, Uber became usable all over the world. Whether San Francisco, Singapore, or Sao Paulo, Uber started to take root over there. So even if the taxis in those cities were not expensive, they got outcompeted by Uber because New York City created a laboratory in which Uber could get enough momentum to spread over the world. And they created a standardized experience through Uber. So now if you go to any city in the world, you know exactly what to do. You don't have to learn about the little tricks of the particular taxis of those cities. You don't really have to worry about being ripped off for the most part. That's much less of a risk under Uber than under taxis in a foreign country. All these little advantages started to stack up. And now taxis are a thing of the past. In fact, when young people in the future look at footage from the pre-Uber era, they will ask the question about why so many cities had all these yellow cars. Why would you choose such an unattractive color? And why are so many of them yellow of all colors? So this is an example of a technological disruption that occurs when an incumbent thinks they are so irreplaceable that they can just charge more and more for exactly the same product or even a product of worsening quality. I'll talk about other examples of where that has happened in the world after this or is about to happen as well. But sticking with Uber, how well has Uber done as a business given that they disrupted all these isolated little taxi markets across the world and unified them into a high-tech solution? So we have high-tech replacing low-tech. So this is one of the best use cases of a technological disruption, and it's a very recent one. A low-tech incumbent thought they could charge more and more and more because there could never be an alternative to them. The delta was everything. Had New York City taxi medallions stayed at 400,000 or even 700,000, Uber might have been delayed by several years. So this is how to think about disruption. When low tech converts to high tech, and what is the cost advantage delta of the high tech? Once you consider these variables, then you can predict technological disruption with considerable accuracy because you are going back to the first principles of technology and economics, which I've also described in other videos on this channel. We'll take a look at this crazy chart, which is titled Estimated Zoning Tax as a Share of Median Household Income in Major U.S. Metropolitan Areas. So to explain what that is, some cities have zoning that is so lopsided between housing demand and commercial demand that house prices are extremely decoupled from the incomes of local people, and this is exacerbated by incumbency advantaging laws like in California, there's Prop 13, which keeps the property tax of someone from 40 years ago relatively unchanged versus a new buyer. So you have two houses of identical value next to each other, two neighbors, and one of them might be paying $500 a year, and the next door neighbor might be paying $30,000 a year in property tax. So the property tax disparity could really be that much. This situation arises from places that had relatively few people and became wealthy in a short time, such as an industry gaining worldwide significance in a matter of just a few decades, and the city planning not being able to catch up, and all the incumbent homeowners being so greedy that they create an impenetrable fortress that prevents any new construction from going on. Los Angeles saw the emergence of both aerospace and entertainment, while the San Francisco Bay Area saw the emergence of technology. People who were lucky enough to be there early made a huge amount of money from how much their home prices rose, but they definitely do everything in their power to prevent the construction of new homes, which is very regressive because it creates a scarcity mentality, and it's a complete mindset of, I've got mine, so I want to prevent anyone else from getting theirs. And that's particularly bad in Silicon Valley because, as you can see, the San Francisco Bay Area is by far the most expensive city on this list and the most artificially created scarcity, but full of tech people who are very, very hypocritical. Here's an example. No technology person will ever say that the number of new iPhone 11s that Apple creates should only be 1,000 so that there's so few of them and then they're rare like a Fabergé egg. No technology person would ever say something like that, but the same people are very happy to say that there should be no new homes created, even though there's no shortage of land, and even though other non-residential types of real estate are all getting crushed. On this channel, I've spoken many times about how retail real estate is completely being crushed because e-commerce is rendering acres and acres and acres of strip malls and all the large associated parking lots as obsolete. But now office real estate is also being crushed under the telework revolution. And many tech companies are going to a model of just 1 or 2 days a week in the office, and therefore the amount of expensive prime office real estate that they require is now much, much less. They're saving that money, and therefore there is now more room to create residential real estate, which is now the only type of real estate that's in shortage. So under market forces, all new construction would be residential real estate. However, the zoning restriction is preventing that because these economically ignorant and very selfish NIMBY type people, NIMBY, N-I-M-B-Y, stands for not in my backyard, they want to prevent all new construction, and they have taken that to such an extreme that this sort of distortion has occurred. And these are metropolitan areas. The Los Angeles metropolitan area is extremely large, about 18 million people. The New York City metropolitan area is about 22 million people. The San Francisco Bay Area is categorized differently than San Jose. So the San Francisco metro area, which includes Oakland and Fremont, is maybe 5 million people. The San Jose Palo Alto area is perhaps another 5 million people. But the Bay Area, being the worst, shows a 400% zoning tax relative to the household income of the locals who live there. The Los Angeles area, about a 275% zoning tax. It is extreme. And only a few cities are really that high. There's some other cities in the middle tier, Philadelphia, Chicago, Portland, Miami, and so forth. It's not really bad there. Housing is somewhat expensive, but not to the ridiculous extremes that it completely crushes the human experience the way it does in Silicon Valley, unless you're a multimillionaire. And then there are a number of cities that are actually very, very inexpensive. Columbus, Dallas, and so forth have very inexpensive housing. Now, what we saw from the Uber example earlier is perhaps the zoning extremes in California, the San Francisco Bay Area, and Los Angeles, as well as in New York City to a lesser extent, but still a 200% extent. Maybe it's creating the same effect that the New York City Taxi Medallion Authority created back in the day to enable such an overpricing relative to technological alternatives that something like Uber emerged. Perhaps an Uber moment is coming very soon for all real estate because 2 or 3 cities have such greedy homeowners and easily bribed city planning officials that they refuse to allow the construction of any new housing. Therefore, a technology like Zoom and other video conferencing technologies, as well as other technologies that assist the remote working and teleworking experience, get so much critical mass and so many people using them that there emerges a Shatterpoint of real estate from these expensive metros that then washes over all expensive cities and reduces many cities to a price more akin to what some of these cheaper cities are. I don't think it'll be that extreme, but the Uber moment, as we saw from taxi medallions, could very well manifest for commercial real estate and therefore residential real estate in these metros, and then it washes over the whole world. It takes just 2 or 3 cities to be so greedy as to create such an artificial inflation of price that a technological alternative comes in, creates something that is so much better, that spreads over the world and outcompetes the status quo, even in cities that did not have lopsided zoning. As we saw in the earlier example, the New York City Taxi Medallion had enough greed that it resulted in the taxi authorities of all sorts of cities all over the world going out of business and giving way to Uber. And the zoning restrictions in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles are giving rise to the telework revolution and Zoom and other technologies in the pipeline that are going to be much more advanced than Zoom, effectively Zoom on steroids, so to speak, and enable more telework capability and therefore crush overpriced real estate the world over. And many technological disruptions arise from this type of situation. An incumbent thinking that what they have is so incredibly extraordinary, so special, so fantastic that they can charge virtually anything for it. The Bay Area is the epicenter of all this technological innovation and all this work that makes the atom propagate, but they don't want to build new housing here. So the incumbents who already live here can keep making more and more and more in home equity simply because supply is restricted. That could lead to a Shatterpoint, because I don't see this as any more resistant to a Shatterpoint than New York City taxi medallions or oil produced by OPEC, frankly, as another example. OPEC thought they could charge $110 per barrel for oil forever, and then technology moved to increase supply, and now oil has extreme difficulty more than a decade later. This is how technological disruptions occur, and this will be very interesting to observe. As more time passes, the more embedded the new practices of telework become, and the more vulnerable the real estate prices of these artificially constrained situations, as we see in the San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles and New York City, become. A lot to think about, and this is a topic we're going to visit pretty often. Now, if you like this type of content and you like to think about these types of big ideas, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.